Hi everyone, and welcome to Deep Geek Live. Welcome to a solo live stream. It's on one of my favourite topics in the Song of Ice and Fire world, House Dayne. A particular welcome if this is your first time watching live. I know there are a couple of people I saw in the chat earlier saying that this was their first time, so welcome. Also welcome if you're watching this a bit later as well. I try and make sure that these live streams work, both if you're watching live in the chat or if you're watching them back a little bit later. The way that we're going to structure this is, as always, I'm going to base this around some questions. I always ask my patrons before each live stream. I just ask them to come up with a few questions for me. And so that is how we're going to structure this. But before we get going, a couple of quick thank yous to Laura Erich and Maura Lee. Thank you both of you very much, very generous super stickers before we went live. So thank you for that. I'm going to kick off with something from Howland's little sister, which I think is a good way to sort of frame this, saying, I'm looking forward to watching today's live stream in real time. Hi, great to see you if you're here watching in real time. I read the books years ago and I have almost no memory of them because so much has been supplanted by the visual impact of the show. Please give me a refresher about House Dayne and what you think will happen in the forthcoming books. Yeah, so that's what I'm planning on doing this time. I'm going to give like a 5 or 10 minute sort of overview of House Dayne, who they are, who the main characters are, why they're significant, just so we're all on the same page. And then I'm going to work my way through the questions, talking first of all about the history, then about what happened in Robert's Rebellion, Arthur Dayne, Ashara Dayne, Tower of Joy, all of that stuff we'll cover, and then a little bit towards the end about what the future might be. What are we going to see coming up in the next 2 books and beyond for House Dayne? So that's roughly how I'm looking to structure this. So House Dayne as a whole is one of the most ancient houses in Westeros. They are first men as an ethnic group, which means that they were one of the first sets of people that came across, that colonized Westeros, that pushed the children of the forest out. They were there right at the time of the first long night. They'll have been there at the time of the Pact. All of those ancient things we hear about, they were there at those times. So they're ancient. They're more ancient than most of the rest of the houses in Dawn, because most of the houses in Dawn, well, not most of them, but a significant number of them, Dawn is actually, complete digression, one of the most ethnically diverse parts of Westeros, it has to be said. But in Dawn, there are a lot of Roynish who came across, as well as some Andals, as well as the first men. But House Dayne were part of that first tranche of settlers, of colonizers who came in. Now, their origin story, and this is, as we say, this is ancient, so this is legend as much as anything else, but I think we can probably give it a reasonable bit of weight, is that the progenitors, the founders of House Dayne, they followed a meteorite which was falling from the sky and went to find where it landed. And where it landed was on this island, which was in the estuary of the river Torrentine, which sort of heads down out of the sort of the Red Mountains and down into the sea, and they made that their home. They called it Starfall for obvious reasons. This is where the shooting star fell, and the meteorite that they got, not only was this like some kind of magical or mystical, this is where you shall build your home kind of thing, but also they used the metal that they found in that to forge their sword, which they called Dawn, or became known as Dawn. This is an ancient sword. Now, we often talk about like the ancient Valyrian steel swords of the houses of Westeros, but they're generally only 300, 400, maybe 500 years old. They're, in the grand scheme of things, they're not ancient. They have been passed down from generation to generation. But Dawn is millennia old. So the first thing you have to understand about this sword is that it's a magical, at least in the fact that it is still a working sword after all this time. It hasn't rusted. It's still an awesome weapon. And it's described slightly differently. It's like milk glass. It's very sharp. And it is given to members of House Dayne, not necessarily just handed on down from one to the next, as happens with the Valyrian steel swords, but they have to be worthy of the honor in a way. They have to be a good enough fighter, and they have to be this kind of worthiness. They have to be good enough to have the sword. And when they have the sword, this holder of dawn becomes known as the Sword of the Morning. And this is this kind of legendary character. And we get through the histories, if you read The World of Ice and Fire and so on, you get mentions of various characters who've held this sword and were the Sword of the Morning in the past. And this is clearly an office and a station, and something that people would aspire to and they look up to, because it isn't automatic. It's not just, oh, who's got the sword now kind of thing. Is that, oh, they've got the sword, they must be good. And bringing this all, well, as I say, a little bit of history before we come up to the sort of the Robert's Rebellion bit. So the house, they started off, they were kings of the Torrentine, they called themselves. Eventually they sort of got subsumed within Dawn. When we get the Nymeria's invasion with the Roynish, they actually sort of marry into House Martell, so they seal that there, and they are very much one of the senior houses in Dawn over this time. At Robert's Rebellion, there are two characters that we know the names of, neither of which are the ruling lord, incidentally. The ruling lord is the eldest brother. There were 4 siblings. The eldest brother, who we do not know the name of, who's the ruling lord. Then we get Arthur and Ashara, and then Valyria, who's the youngest child, but is quite a bit younger. And Arthur was the Sword of the Morning. He had the sword Dawn. He was known as the greatest swordsman in the entire land. He joined the Kingsguard, and he was the best friend of Rhaegar. Ashara, legendary beauty. I'm sure there was more to her than just her looks, but she was very, very well known, and she was Elia's lady-in-waiting, Elia Martell, the wife of Rhaegar. So those two were clearly very closely tied in with Team Rhaegar during Robert's Rebellion. And all the evidence seems to suggest that they were linked in with what happened at the Tower of Joy. This is not just because Arthur was there. He was the one of the 3 Kingsguard who were there guarding Lyanna, but also this was relatively close to Starfall, pardon me, and that's where Ned went straight after he did what he did at the Tower of Joy. I did a video on why I think he went to Starfall about a week or 2 ago, so if you're interested in that level of detail, please do go and check that out. But for now, I think it probably suffices to say that all the implications are that they were the house who were most closely involved in what was going on with Team Rhaegar. And when Ned went there afterwards, it was partly to return the sword, Arthur Dayne's sword, but also it was to tie off all of the loose ends that were going on with the Tower of Joy. He was absolutely focused on making sure that there were no leads left after this with the Tower of Joy. Even destroying the tower, not telling people where it was, all that kind of business. So yes, of course, he went off to Starfall after that. After what happened with Ned, and Ned then leaves, after that, House Dayne goes quiet. We hear that Ashara Dayne commits suicide. Personally, I don't believe that was actually what happened. I think that she married Howland Reed and moved up to the Neck. But House Dayne after that went quiet. We still don't know the name of who the Lord was. Valyria Dayne, who's much younger, she eventually did get engaged to Beric Dondarrion, incidentally, and the son, the heir of the Lord, was a guy called Edric Dayne, who had the nickname Ned after Ned Stark, and he went off to be the squire to Beric Dondarrion, who was effectively marrying the family. So that's where we're at sort of present day. Obviously, then the events of Game of Thrones happens. Beric Dondarrion goes off and forms the Brotherhood of Atlas, and we get Edric Dayne out of that being his squire there. We sort of see him a couple of times during the stories. He randomly meets up with Arya, for example, and then a little bit later we hear from him again. And the other, so that's where House Dayne are. Presumably the Old Lord has died. Arthur and Ashara are gone. So really we've got Edric, who is he's the current Lord of Starfall. The other character to probably mention at this point is a guy with the really cool nickname of Darkstar. Now he's Sir Gerald Dayne, and he is one of the Danes of High Hermitage. Now, High Hermitage is a few miles away from Starfall. It's a cadet branch of House Dayne, which basically means that they're related to them and they've got very strong links, but it's like a few generations back. But they retain the name Dayne. So the key character here is a guy called, as I say, called Darkstar, who appears. He gets caught up in a whole load of plots with the Martells, with Ariane Martell, which weren't on the show. But he clearly, as well as being this kind of like charismatic and slightly evil character, is a good swordsman and does seem to be jealous of Arthur Dayne, leading to, and we will definitely come on to this a little bit later, I'm sure, leading to hints that he might wish to sort of become more like Arthur was, certainly in the eyes of others. So that's the background to House Dayne as a sort of a primer for where we're at. I've got a few questions about the history of House Dayne, which we'll come on to in a moment. I'll just have a very quick check in the chat. Lots of great people in the chat today. There's Buckley, who was here last week. Hi there, Joe. Lots of people are saying, can we have him back? He was talking about castles. I'm sure we can have him back at some point. Excellent chap and fantastic. If you missed it, please do go. He's literally written the book about the great castle of Westeros, so please do go and check that one out. Bal the Bard, not seen you for a while, great to see you in there. And also, who else? Mandolin, hi there, great to see you, Mandy. And my moderators, I just want to give a big shout out to moderators. Thank you so much. You do so much fantastic work, not just for this channel, but also I know for a number of other channels as well. Moderators, I blow my mind by how gracious and giving you are, so thank you so much. Okay, there was a question, super chat. Thank you so much to Catherine Hanson Fursith, saying, if Ashara did indeed marry Howland Reed, that must mean that Howland didn't stab Arthur Dayne in the back like the show suggests. Yes, I think that's the case. I don't think that Howland Reed did. I think Howland Reed, Ned was very clear. It was very vague language, typical George R.R. Martin, very vague language. But he said, but for Howland Reed, Arthur Dayne would have killed me. So I think Howland did prevent Arthur Dayne from killing Ned Stark. Arthur Dayne was, as all of those Kingsguard was a bit of a job's worth. He was defending the Tower of Joy with his life, and I think Howland stopped that in some way. There are many ways that he could have done that. It's entirely possible he could have played the family card and said, "Hey, guess what? I'm the father of your newborn niece," or something along those lines. Perhaps that could have stopped it. Perhaps he's a magic user. Perhaps he used some sort of magic. We don't know. I think that the show version of Howland Reed stabbing Arthur Dayne in the back was just a shortcut to get to where they wanted to get to, which was Arthur Dayne dead. How on earth could this amazing swordsman have died? Well, he got stabbed in the back. Okay, fair enough. I think that there was a slightly more convoluted reason, but if they were to go down that route, then they'd have had to do a huge amount more explanation for show-only people about who House Dayne were and why it was important who Howland Reed was and all the rest of it. So they didn't talk about House Reed or House Dayne pretty much on the show, other than sort of vaguely here and there. But that meant that they couldn't then give us sort of a more nuanced version of what happened at the Tower of Joy. So we just get a fight, basically. So Jojo Lady Dayne suggesting, I think Howland Reed used green seer magic. Yeah, I think that's entirely possible as the kind of one of the ways he could have done it. I don't like the idea it was just a stab in the back, but it was possible, I guess. I mean, that's what George says, and that's where we'll end up, I guess. Okay, let's pick up on a couple of questions. So Didelphi Morphia, thank you. So we did a super chat before we went live, actually. So thank you very much for that. It was very generous. Saying, really looking forward to this. Where did House Dayne come from? Are they really descendants of the Bloodstone Emperor of Ashai, or someone from old Valyria? Okay, so this is where they came from. We know that they're first men. So there were this group who came across from Essos in the early days. As for the link to Valyria, this is one of those things that George R. R. Martin has actually been clear on. He has basically he's been asked to his face, "Hey, hang on a moment. We know that House Dayne often have purple or very deep blue eyes, and so do the Valyrians. Does this mean that they're connected in some way?" And he was absolutely clear and categorical, no. This is just one of those things in life, you know, just because somebody's got purple eyes and some other people have got purple eyes, that doesn't mean that they're related in any way. It just means some people have purple eyes. So there is not a link in terms of families between the Valyrians, between the Targaryens, say, and House Dayne. That's just a coincidence thing. Are they descendants of the Bloodstone Emperor of you say Ashai, UT? I think this is one of those things. So for those who don't know, so the Bloodstone Emperor was this kind of legendary figure at around the same time as the Long Night in Westeros, but over in the far east of Essos. And there are stories and legends which are very closely connected with what we have about the stories and legends in Westeros about what happened with the Long Night. And the Bloodstone Emperor there is this, I suppose he's a hero figure. He's quite a dark figure, but he's very much connected with the end of the Long Night. Now, I know that there are, and I'm not going to go into it here, but there are sort of symbolism links between that legend over there and what we've got over in Westeros, particularly with Dawn, because just taking the words, just because otherwise I'm teasing it too much, taking the words dawn as a sword, what ends the long night? Dawn ends the long night. And what ends night? Morning, and the bearer of dawn is called the Sword of the Morning. So yeah, that kind of makes sense that there is some link across there. Does that mean that they're sort of familiarly connected? To my mind, no. I don't think that that does. I think that what George R.R. Martin has done is created a series of legends coming from different places in his world, which all come back to the same story. In the same way that in our real world legendarium, so to speak, the story of Noah is in many different cultures, and it's not known as the story of Noah in all of those different cultures. In the Bible, we have the story of Noah. There's some in Babylonian mythology. There's the story of a character who gets in a boat when the world gets flooded. You head across to India, you get similar stories. So they're clearly, these things all come, in my mind, from an event that sort of spread out into legend in various different cultures over time. That, I think, is what George R.R. Martin was doing here. There was an event that we call the Long Night that emerged into stories and legends in different cultures. So I think that is where the link is, rather than specifically this family, the Daynes, because I think the Daynes were over in Westeros at that time, rather than all the way on the far east of Essos, even in sort of contemporary times in sort of Westeros and Essos. So that journey is a very, very, very long journey, not the kind of thing you just sort of nip across for. So I think that they moved across a long time earlier than that. Fanzilla with a really important question here, saying, thank you for the super chat, by the way. Who decides who becomes the Sword of the Morning? It is important. I'm assuming the Lord of Starfall, and thank you for the great content. You're welcome on the content. In terms of who does decide, we're not told specifically who does decide, but the implication, yes, is that it is the Lord of Starfall, which means, crucially, and I was trying to tease out some of the differences between the Valyrian steel swords and the Sword of Dawn. Valyrian steel swords tend to go to the head of the family. Ice with the Starks went down from Lord of Winterfell to Lord of Winterfell. You get what else? We have Blackfire, the Targaryens. It didn't always necessarily stay with the king, but when it didn't go to the king, that was seen as a sign of, oh, should that person be king? There isn't any of that here with Dawn. It goes to the great fighter, the worthy person in the family, which at the time of Arthur Dayne was Arthur Dayne, and it would have been presumably his elder brother who decided that, who will have had to say, actually, you know what, it's not me, I'm not Sword of the Morning, but Arthur, he's pretty good with the sword, he is. So yeah, it's never explicitly said, but that is the clear implication. Let's go to a question from my patrons. Fred Versteeg, just picking up on this, where is the house coming from, saying the Danes are a very old house, but are they descendants of the first men? Yes. And if so, why the white hair and purple eyes? So the purple eyes I've already covered. They're not all people in House Dayne have purple eyes. Ashara Dayne did, but others have slightly sort of dark blue eyes and all the rest of it. So it's not exactly just purple. As for white hair, not all have white hair. Some have dark, some have, so Gerald Dayne Darkstar has a sort of a dark with a white streak. It does seem to vary there, so what their hair color is. So it's not like the Targaryens all have exactly the same color hair, and you would look at there's a typical Stark look. That House Dayne, it seems a lot more varied, to be honest. And has their magical sword more in common with the magic from Essos than the old magic from Westeros? Do you think the two stories of how the Long Night ended in Essos and Westeros has something to do with this remarkable family? Well, I've covered off that bit, but in terms of the sword, I think, again, House Dayne, I tend to think as being one of those families that actually they're above these kind of distinctions about what sort of magic are we talking about here. So magic seems, as in many types of fantasy creations, it comes from the heavens. It comes from above in some way. So House Dayne's sword comes from this meteorite which comes down from the heavens. When in book 1 we get this the red comet that hails the return of magic, that hails huge amounts of things, Dany's dragons and all the rest of it. So the heavens seem to bring magic. There's a whole other video I'll do at some point about all of the sort of the black oily stones and all the rest of it, things that are dotted around Westeros and Essos, that they come from the heavens. But there does seem to be this kind of idea that magic comes from the heavens. So that means that the sword being coming direct from the sky, from meteorites and all the rest of it, this isn't like Essosi magic or Westerosi magic. This is just magic. This pure magic. It's not the magic of the Children of the Forest. It's not the magic of fire mages in Essos. This is just pure magic. And it's probably worth saying that when we're talking about Dawn, we're told it's a magic sword. We're not told how it's magical. And I do wonder whether that's one of the mysteries that we're going to get revealed in the future. So it's definitely a magical sword. Valyrian steel swords may have been forged by magic, but there's no kind of implication that they do things other than be light and sharp and long-lasting and all the rest of it. Dawn as a sword clearly is long-lasting, but what's the magic involved? That I suspect is a mystery that we're going to get a little bit unpacked in the last couple of books. Had a couple of super chats. Thank you so much. Donald Peoples saying, do you lean along the lines of Dawn equals original ice, or at least Lightbringer? Any theories on their house words? I'll come to their house words in a moment, if that's okay. A couple of questions from my patrons along those lines. In terms of, is Dawn the original ice, or at least Lightbringer? I know there are people who have drawn out thematic links between Dawn and ice, ice being the ancestral sword of House Stark. Ice is a Valyrian steel sword. It is almost certainly 400 or 500 years old. That leaves a huge gap between Dawn, which is a few millennia old, and ice. So I don't think it's an original version of ice. I think it's ice is just happens to be the Valyrian steel sword that they have up in Winterfell. That's I don't see that there's a particular link there. I think the Lightbringer thing is more possible. Now, Lightbringer is the legendary sword of Azor Ahai, of course. Now, this was forged by plunging it into his lover, Nissa, and it comes out and it's a flaming sword and all the rest of it. So, are they the same? Well, the origin stories are clearly different. It was forged. Yeah. Dawn was forged from a fallen star, and Lightbringer was forged. We're not told that it was from a fallen star, but it was tempered in the blood of his lover. But I think for me, the kind of the thematic links between Dawn, the sword of the morning, the end of the long night, do suggest that there's a link there somewhere. Now, I do wonder, and this is, if you came here looking for tinfoil, this is probably the most tinfoil thing there is, because this is just a gut instinct rather than anything I can particularly articulate. I think, for reasons I'll get into in a bit, I think that we're going to find that the Sword Dawn does go from Starfall and it will go over to King's Landing. And I think that Jon will kill Daenerys in the books. I think that that's what's going to happen. I did a video on this, incidentally, a couple of years ago, and that was based purely on Dany's visions in the House of the Undying. Incidentally, it wasn't anything which was going on the TV show. That was called the video "Will Jon Kill Daenerys?" on the basis of my interpretation of those videos, of those visions. Now, if Jon is going to kill her, this is going to be some sort of echo. George R. R. Martin loves doing sort of echoes of legends and all the rest of it. Some sort of echo of what happened with Azor Ahai and Nissa Nissa killing his lover. Jon and Dany, I believe, will be lovers in the books as well as on the show. The question is, what implement will be used to do this? On the show, it was just like a random whatever dagger or whatever he had in his hand. They didn't do much about that. I don't think George R. R. Martin would allow it to just be a random thing. I think it will have to be something with some kind of symbolism. So your free tinfoil for today is that when Jon kills Daenerys in the books, it will be with Lightbringer. And it would not surprise me in the slightest if that actually makes Dawn flame like Lightbringer, the sword, is supposed to flame. So that's because she's of the dragon blood, because she's a Valyrian. That would make a whole lot of sense to me. So that's my theory. I think it's really good questions. I don't think that there's a link personally. I don't see the link with ice, although I understand why people do think that. But I do see a link, of course, with Lightbringer. Steph S, thank you for the super chat. Just saying, great content and love your voice. Thank you. I really appreciate that. And Enigma's I just spotted it in the chat. Enigma's 00 saying Dany plus Jon equals Baby Yoda. That would be a great twist. I would love that to happen. Okay, let's go with another question from my patrons. John McGarrity saying, I won't be able to make the stream today, but hopefully you'll be able to watch this catching up later. My question is concerning the connection between House Dayne and the Valyrian Freehold. Is it possible that the origins of the dragons that helped usher in Valyrian dominance and the legends of the fallen star that began the establishment of House Dayne are in some way related? Could it be that Starfall wasn't the only place on Planetos where stars fell, and that could somehow have contributed to the discovery of dragons and the magic that the Valyrians depended on for rule? Yeah, so this is getting deep into history, and deep into history we don't know huge amounts about. So basically the old Valyrians, goat herders, discovered dragons, and they used this discovery of dragons to ruling the world. It's glossed over quite quickly in the world of Ice and Fire. That to me seems like quite a big old leap, that they were just hanging around and then, whoa, there's some dragons, let's ride them. That doesn't there's something missing in that account. So I do wonder whether there is some extra level, as I've said, magic seems to come from above. So perhaps they're led there by a shooting star. There are the legends, the Dothraki legends about dragons coming from the moon and all the rest of it, which again seems to imply some kind of something coming from above. The honest answer, and it sometimes feels like it's a cop-out, but it's not. There are some things George R. R. Martin has not yet told us, so we do not know. I like the idea that came from above. I also like the idea that the dragons came from below, that they were down there in the sort of the 14 flames in the volcanoes, and they came up from there and they were discovered that way. So there are many possible options. Maybe a meteorite slammed into the ground, created a volcano, who knows? Because as I say, we simply do not no. So I wish I could give a fuller answer. I would literally just go into huge amounts of tinfoil if I went any further than that. There is a gap there that George R. R. Martin has left. Maybe one day he'll tell us, or maybe he won't. But for me, there is a gap between they weren't all that much. Then they discovered dragons. Then they ruled the world. That seems like an incredible shortcut. Just quickly flicking through the chat, Scott McCloy saying Jon better not kill Dany in the books. Yeah, I mean, I would rather he didn't, but I think it will happen. Bal the Bard saying, what gets me is that ice isn't what kills the others, even if VS, not sure what VS is. So it's weird that you'd name a black sword after what the others are made of. Yep, absolutely. So there's a lot of symbolism in the colors of the swords as well, which is I think quite important. Scott McCloy again pointing out Jon is going to be some kind of wild wolf man when he comes back. So this is something I covered in a recent video. On the show, Jon died and was just brought back. In the books, if you want all of the detailed thinking behind it, please do check out that video. That was probably about a month ago now. But he probably will go into Ghost. He's going to warg into Ghost and then be brought back from Ghost into his body when his body gets revived. So that's what's going to happen, and he's going to spend a period of time as a wolf. And so I'm really hoping in the Winds of Winter we get a Ghost chapter with Jon inside Ghost, which will be absolutely amazing. But when he returns, we're told that the longer you spend walking into your beast that you have this link with, the more you sort of get subsumed within them, more they take over. So when Jon comes out, he will almost certainly be slightly more wolfish. And I've spent a long time speculating what slightly more wolfish means, but I would guess it means something along the lines of both more willing to sort of take his own lead on things and being more pack-like, I'm guessing with House Stark, slightly more vicious, willing to kill, and I always find it hard to say with that smile, but slightly more brooding, perhaps. So I think that is perhaps what we're more likely to see, and this is possibly, if his pack-like tendency and his willingness to kill are increased, I think that is probably the kind of thing which would push him over more to be the killing Dany type, if that makes sense. Okay, let's go. So there was a question. I think actually I had a super chat. Let's not miss that one out. Mod Mary 1, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, have you heard the Targaryens plus faceless men equals the Doom theory? Love your work. Cheers. Well, thank you very much. I'm not sure entirely which theory that is. I came out with my own theory on the Doom years ago. I did a whole series on Magic, the Maesters, and the Faceless Men, and linked in with that, I think one thing almost everyone agrees on is that the Faceless Men caused the Doom in some way. This was probably by them assassinating the fire mages, which were holding the volcanoes effectively at bay. That caused this huge explosion, and that was the Doom. End of the Valyrian freehold and all the rest of it. The question is, who paid the Faceless Men to do that job? Because some people seem to get into this idea that the Faceless Men did it because they thought that the Valyrians deserved it in some way. Everything we know about the Faceless Men, whenever they're talking to Arya is asking whether people deserve to die, and they say no. Who deserves to die? It's not a matter of who deserves to die, it's a matter of everyone deserves to die. All men must die. It's a matter of who we've been paid to kill. And that, I think, is where the Faceless Men are at. They will have been paid to kill. There is, and I say I always spoil my videos. This one was such a long time ago. I don't think it's spoiling a video, but perhaps summarizing it. There is a sort of this ancient legend that was in Valyria that the Lannister gold would be the doom for them. They didn't quite use the doom as a phrase, but they refused to accept Lannister gold. They refused to make a sword, a Valyrian steel sword, for the Lannisters because of this legend that the Lannister gold would be a terrible curse upon the Valyrians. So the question then is how, well, two questions. Where did the Lannisters get their sword from, if it wasn't from the Valyrians? And because they did have one, they have now lost it, but they did have one. And secondly, was that sort of prophecy true? Was that legend true, that this Lannister gold would have caused their downfall? The way that I can see this happening is that the Maesters, who, as we know, have never been fans of magic, have always been wanting to bring down dragons at the end of magic and all the rest of it, the Maesters had been gaining knowledge from the Valyrians. We know, we were told specifically, Maesters went over, were copying books, bringing books back from Valyria. They also do have the secret of how to forge Valyrian steel, because they forged the chains for the links. For if you learn about magic, the higher mysteries, you get a Valyrian steel link, which implies that they know how, they have the knowledge of how to forge Valyrian steel in some way. And the Lannisters could well have paid their money to the Maesters to make them their sword. The Maesters then have the Lannister gold, decide they wish to get rid of this, the magic, the dragons and all the rest of it. They use the Lannister gold to hire the Faceless Men. That, for me, is how this all ties together. The Lannister gold, the Faceless Men, the Maesters with their ongoing agenda and all the rest of it. That is how that one works for me. So I don't know exactly which theory, Mod Mary, you were talking about, but that is my personal theory about what happened. Okay, let's go to a question from Bryn Jones. I was going to go to. So this was picking up from a super chat, also from a little bit earlier. Apologies, I can't remember who it was from. Saying, what is your working hypothesis for the words of House Dayne? Now, for those who don't know, this is an ongoing area of some debate within the sort of the world of A Song of Ice and Fire. All houses have their house words. Now, we know quite a few of them. We know winter is coming. Ours is the fury. That kind of thing. We know about the main houses, but some we've never been told. One of them is House Dayne. And George R. R. Martin has been asked what are House Dayne's words, because a lot of the time the house words are kind of hinting of either the character of the house or perhaps there's some slightly foreshadowy thing. Winter is coming very clearly with the Starks is a warning about what's going on. Ours is the Fury, which is House Baratheon. That sums up a lot of House Baratheon as a people, what they are like. So what are the House Dayne words? George R. R. Martin has been asked, and he has deliberately evaded answering. He has even gone as far as admitting that the reason is that they might be slightly spoilery. Now, this is, as I say, it's cause of some conjecture amongst fans. My working hypothesis is that this is probably going to be something that shows the role of the sword Dawn. And I wonder whether it's going to be something. We're always searching for some sort of beautiful, wonderful, very spoilery phrase. I suspect it's not going to be quite as clear as that. It will be along the lines of the ones that we already know, which are hints rather than anything else. And it will be something along the lines, I suspect, something along the lines of dawn is the end of the long night, or something like that. Or dawn brings an end to the long night. That implies that the sword Dawn has got a role in ending the long night, or had a role in ending the long night, and it explains why George R. R. Martin might think it's slightly spoilery, because we go, oh, so this sword is very important and will have an important role in that particular part of the story, which might be why he doesn't do it. I can't think that there's some kind of like the house words of House Dayne are, we always support Rhaegar Targaryen, or something along those lines. That's not where it's going to be at. It's going to be something to do with their role, connected with them being a first men, connected with the sword, connected with the role of the Sword of the Morning. So that is what we're looking at, I think. Just quickly flicking through. 979 saying House Dayne's words, season 8 will suck. Scott McCloy, a brand new day. Yeah, that's quite possible. I love it whenever this question comes up, because everyone in the chat then always comes up with what their thoughts are. Didelphia Morphia saying dawn ends the night. Yeah, absolutely. That's something along those lines, I think. Poisoned Pinup saying the dragon's son brings the dawn. Yeah, that would be quite spoilery. That would be the kind of thing that were there. Ted Dawson 68 Dawson, bring the dawn. Yeah, R plus L equals J. Thank you, Bald. Yes, that's absolutely right. Jojo Lady Dane, we bring the light, or we bring dawn. So Buckley, we go till dawn. Yeah, so I think I think everyone's along the same color way. Dawn is coming, and all the rest of it. Danny McKay, House Dayne's words, nothing to see here. Carry on. I think that's probably fair. Shamanka and Angel Heart, darkest hour before the dawn. Yeah, I think everyone's along the same lines here. It's something to do with bringing dawn, bringing the end of night, morning, something along those lines. Ted Dawson, 68 Dawson, do you think Ashara is the mum of the Reed kids? Yes, I do, but I will come on to that properly in a moment. Okay, thanks, guys. Please do keep these suggestions coming about get off my dawn, says Josh Koff. Thank you. Good suggestions. But talking about the sword, we've got Maura saying, compare and contrast the two swords, Dawn, which was made from a falling star, and the Witcher's sword. This is from The Witcher, so Geralt of Rivia's sword, which is also made from a fallen star. Is there any deeper significance to both being made from a fallen star, or do you think the authors just thought it would be cool? Well, I think there's definitely an element of both of the authors thought it would be cool. I think that there's also an element of, as I said, a lot of fantasy worlds and creations do have this concept, which was a very medieval concept in our own world, that sort of magic and good things come from above. And so, yes, a fallen star, a meteorite, would indeed be viewed with great awe and respect and wonderment, and be thought of as magical in some way. So I think there's definitely that. The difference, I think, is that in the Witcher universe, then Witcher swords, generally the what we call as the silver sword, the sword which is used for killing monsters. That is something not just Geralt has, but lots of the witches have. There's the so the background there is that they had this thing called the conjunction of the spheres back in time. That is why there are all these monsters in this world, was that the magical things became aligned and misaligned and all the rest of it, and creatures that shouldn't have been in this universe or this world were brought in through the conjunction of the spheres, and so a whole load of animals and creatures and monsters that hadn't grown up in this ecosystem but had just been dropped in there. All your sort of your manticores and your ghouls and all the rest of it, they appear in the world for that. And so it makes sense that the thing which damages them the most is something also which comes from the spheres. You know, it sounds like the planets, they're up from the heavens. So that's where that link has come from. And George R. R. Martin, as I say, it's not just this meteorite which lands on Starfall. He's also got things like the red comet, hints that a lot of the sort of the black oily stone might also come from space. So that is the sort of the where magic comes from. Question from Donald Peoples. Thank you for the super chat, saying, what are the chances that House Dayne are stewards for Dawn/Lightbringer? Yeah, I think that this is possible. That if we accept the idea, which, as I say, to me, I'm very happy to entertain it as an idea, that that Dawn the sword is Lightbringer, then I think we have to say that yes, House Dayne are the stewards of that. The one, it's almost a random bit of sort of detail of information that we have that makes me think that perhaps this might be the case, is if you look at the geographical locations of the important things that we have going on in terms of sort of the defense of the realms of men, a lot of them are on islands. So, for example, the Isle of Faces is an island. Dragonstone has this dragonglass mine there. Again, Dragonstone is an island. Starfall is an island. And there does seem to be, certainly that came out on the show, not so much yet on the books, but there are hints with the placement of the wall and everything like that, that the others might not be able to cross running water in some way. So if you were going to have your important things left waiting for, you know, a possible next incursion of the others, where would you put them? You would put them in different places so that, you know, they couldn't all be damaged and killed in one go, and you would put them on islands so that they wouldn't be immediately accessible by the others. So that's, as I say, I don't think it quite counts as evidence, but it would certainly support this idea that this was a relic from the first long night, which has been kept safe, and House Dayne are indeed stewards of the Sword Dawn. So that's it's a good theory, and it certainly seems it doesn't go against any of the evidence at the very least, and it's backed up by quite a lot of circumstantial evidence. Let's actually, I've just noticed the time. We've been going for a little while. What I always do partway through my live streams is just to take a moment to say, and I've still got quite a few more questions coming up, by the way, a lot of them about Robert's Rebellion, Arthur Dayne, Ashara Dayne, and all the rest of it. So I'll come to them in just one second. But I always take a moment just to say what's coming up next on this channel. So as you know, we're not just covering A Song of Ice and Fire anymore. I'm expanding out. I'm doing Lord of the Rings videos as well. I've done 4 or 5 of them. So if you're at all interested in the background, the history, because there's obviously so much more than just the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit. But if you're wanting to know what is the Second Age or the Third Age, who is Sauron? What's the backstory there? Is he just this two-dimensional character, or is there something slightly more to him? Spoiler alert: there's something slightly more to him. What is the One Ring? Is it more than just a thing that makes you invisible? What's going on there? So if you want to understand some of these things, I've done a whole series of videos there, and I will be carrying on doing them all the way through, probably for the next couple of years or so, until the Amazon TV show, massive budget TV show, comes out. In terms of the A Song of Ice and Fire content, a couple of things to note. The first, I'm coming to the end of a couple of series. The Robert's Rebellion series, I'm nearly there. I've got one or possibly two more videos to do on it. One of them I'm going to be looking at Aegon, baby Aegon / Fagon / young Griff. Is he actually baby Aegon, or is he someone else? So that's one video I'll be doing. Another one I will be doing, which is wrapping this whole thing up, which is looking at Bloodraven, Howland Reed, and if in doubt, blame the both of them. How they ran the events of Robert's Rebellion, behind the scenes, manipulated things, and all the rest of it. This is something I've alluded to many times over the last couple of years. How I see their influence in various places over time, but I'm going to pull it all together. Might turn into quite a long video, I guess, but I'm going to put it all together into one video where I see the influence of Bloodraven and Howland Reed during that period and what that means for the story going forward. The Traveler's Guide, I know a lot of people have appreciated the travel guide over a long period of time. It's been going now, Traveler's Guide now for nearly 2 years, I think, and it is finally starting to draw to a close. We've got 3 more episodes, I think, to go. We've got Quaithe, which is coming out tomorrow. Then we're going to look at Yeti, and then Ashara. And that will be then all the way through the world of Planetos. There are a couple of odds and ends that as I've gone through, I've realized that I've missed out a couple of places, like the Fist of the First Men I didn't quite do, and there are a couple of other random bits. What I'm going to do with them is I've always said at the beginning of all of my videos in the Traveler's Guide that I can only do it with the support of my patrons, and I genuinely mean that. My patrons, thank you. It's your support that allows me to do what I do, and so as a thank you to you, I will do a few extra Traveler's Guides just to finish it all off, available just for my patrons over on my Patreon page. If you're at all interested, by the way, in either supporting the channel generally or getting access to them when I do them in the next few weeks, there's a link down in the description to my Patreon page. So as I say, that's just a thank you I wanted to do for my patrons for the support all the way through the Traveler's Guide. I really, really appreciate it. And then finally, the other thing I wanted to say was The Well Told Tale, my second channel, is now a podcast. This is me reading audiobooks, what I consider to be the best science fiction and fantasy stories ever written. So if you're at all interested in podcasts, if you're a podcast person, please do go and try and find The Well Told Tale. It should be on wherever you get your podcasts from. It helps me, particularly if you get your things through iTunes. If you happen to leave a positive comment in there, doesn't have to be positive, be honest, but if you leave a comment in there, then it really helps sort of bump it up the charts. So if you could find some time to do that, I would really appreciate it. But I think that's it for now. I'm sure I've forgotten something I should have mentioned, but let's get back to the questions from my patrons. And so we're talking now, we've talked a lot about sort of the history of House Dayne, where they come from, what their big role might be, and what the sword might be signifying. But we've got a few questions about House Dayne in Robert's Rebellion, the Tower of Joy, and all of that. which is, this is where we really know House Dayne. I think House Dayne wouldn't have captured people's imagination if it hadn't been for those two characters of Arthur Dayne and Ashara Dayne. And the honest thing is that we don't know huge amounts. They're one of these kind of characters who we're told they're significant. We're shown they're significant. We see that there are all of the significant places. They're at the tourney at Harrenhal. They're there at Dragonstone, picking up Lyanna, the Tower of Joy. Ashara's there when Ned goes to Starfall. There are all of the important places, so they must be important. But we're never told exactly why. So I think that is why there's this kind of speculation about what might be going on. So I've got a few questions from my patrons on that. I'll try and pick up a few other questions from the chat as we're going through on this as well. The first question from Bonds is asking about the possibility that the fisherman's daughter was Ashara. Being pregnant at the time, could this be the miscarriage that Barristan refers to? Okay, so those who don't know what this is about, we got it towards the end of book 5. We get this account, and it's barely even an account. I probably should have brought it up to show quite how brief this is, but we get Davos, who happens to be on the Three Sisters, this set of islands just sort of between the Vale and the north, between White Harbour, if you can sort of picture that on a little map. And the Lord there just gives this offhand comment about, oh yeah, so Ned Stark passed through this way on his way north during the first months of Robert's Rebellion with a fisherman and his daughter, and they got caught up in a big storm, and the fisherman died, but then he and the daughter managed to make it safely up to White Harbour. They say that Ned Stark left the fisherman's daughter with pregnant, and he gave her a bag of money, and then she named the child Jon after Jon Arryn, who was the Lord of the Vale at the time. So that was the story. This has led some people to speculate that perhaps this was Ashara Dayne, the fisherman's daughter. Now, I think that to cut to the end of this, I don't think it is, and the reason I don't think it is that there's no evidence for it. There's no evidence that Ashara was ever anywhere around there. There's no hints. There's no rumors. There's no people talking about somebody with purple eyes. There's no story that Ashara Dayne left Dragonstone and headed north. There's nothing. There's literally silence on this idea. So there's nothing to support it other than this idea that Ned and Ashara were lovers, which I personally think the evidence was that they weren't. Again, I've done videos on this in the past if you're at all interested in all of that angle. So I think the first thing you have to do is overcome this idea that there's literally no evidence for it. Then you have to overcome this idea that it actually doesn't make any sense for Ashara, even if they were lovers, for Ashara to be there with Ned, because the logic has to be that he said, hey, come to the Eyrie, that's where I am. And then war broke out, but he doesn't seem to have told either the Lord of the Eyrie, Jon Arryn, or his best friend, who, this is pre-falling out, they were closer than brothers, we're told. He doesn't seem to have told Robert Baratheon about Ashara Dayne at all. Robert Baratheon never even guesses that Ashara Dayne might be the mother of Jon Snow. That's not even on his radar. So this would have been done complete. If Ned was in love, he didn't tell anybody about it. He invited her around to someone's house without telling the person whose house it was. Then he would have instead of saying stay there at the most safe place in the entirety of Westeros, which the Eyrie probably was, he then took her through the mountains, past all the mountain clans, which would have been a horrendously risky thing, then took her into a storm on a small boat, then made her pregnant and gave her a bag of money. None of this adds up. She was a rich woman. He didn't need to leave her with a bag of money. That she didn't need to name her child after Jon Arryn if she was a Dane. Why on earth would she do that? None of the story adds up. So I'd probably given this far too much time and attention. But I think that the short answer is I don't think that there's much chance that Ashara Dayne was the fisherman's daughter here, simply because there is, as I see it, no evidence to suggest that that is the case. Bonds also asked about the timeline. Now, this is another interesting thing about the timeline. So saying if Rhaella left King's Landing before it was sacked by Tywin, Ned didn't leave King's Landing until after Robert arrived. Ned then travels to Storm's End and then heads to the Tower of Joy. Rough calculation would be over 2 months from when Rhaella left King's Landing to when Jon was born. And George R. R. Martin has said that Daenerys is roughly 9 months younger than Jon. That just does not add up. So I understand why people get caught up on these details, but I personally don't think that this is actually quite as conclusive as people seem to think. But it's often used as some sort of evidence that perhaps Jon wasn't born at the Tower of Joy, or there was some sort of baby swap going on. The fact is, George R. R. Martin has been deliberately vague about timings in Robert's Rebellion, and he wants us to be vague about it. So we're talking like weeks here and there. He's not that bothered. There are some things we can kind of like put as like temp poles and try and work our way around them, and we know roughly how long it takes to travel from one place to another. And he did say, he's gone on record as saying that Daenerys was born 8 or 9 months after Jon was. And we know that she was conceived a little bit before the sack of King's Landing. We don't know the exact date, but that's roughly where it is now. So after the sack of King's Landing, Ned hung around for a couple of days or so while Robert Baratheon joined him. Then the same day, we're told, he then left with his army to go to Storm's End. They got to Storm's End. There was no fight that very day. Mace Tyrell surrendered and they went off. And then Ned headed straight over to the Tower of Joy. So you're looking at a couple of weeks, give or take, along the King's Road. The King's Road does go south as well from King's Landing down to Storm's End. Incidentally, doesn't just go north, it goes south. So a couple of weeks on that road, maybe a month or so, it seems, traveling from Storm's End to the Tower of Joy. So we've got roughly 6 weeks or so there, which means that according to the rough timings we have, Jon was born a bit before Ned got there. A bit, we're being quite vague because George R. R. Martin is a bit vague, could be anywhere from a few days, a couple of weeks, a month, maybe even 6 weeks or so. But Jon, when Ned gets there, is still a newborn baby, but Ned didn't arrive at the time of birth. And that is exactly what seems to have happened at the Tower of Joy. We're never told that Ned arrives as the baby is being born. That's not what we're told in the slightest. We're told that Lyanna died from a fever, not from childbirth, but from a fever. And there are always people in the chat who can tell me the exact name of this, but post-childbirth fever was, it's still around in the world today, but there's a sort of a special maternity name for it. I don't know exactly what it is, but particularly in medieval times, this was something that would happen quite a lot, was in a few weeks or so after birth often fever, and that would be what killed Lyanna. So I understand why people try and work out and go, well, that doesn't quite work, but it's usually based on a misconception of Jon being born when Ned arrived. Jon was not born when Ned arrived. Jon was born a little bit before Ned arrived. So I hope that one clears that one up for you, Bonds. Shade of the Evening, thank you so much for the super chat, saying, hi, do you think Dawn will be the sword the prince that was promised will use? If so, how will he or she get it? Thanks. Yeah, I will come on to the future of it in a little while. But I will say this just in answer to this question now. I think that, and I've said this consistently for years, and I will say it consistently for more years, I'm sure. I think that when the books are finished, we will still be arguing amongst ourselves who Azor Ahai Reborn or the Prince that was promised actually was. There will be a few candidates who it could have been. Jon will clearly be one of them. Dany will clearly be one of them. There'll be another few people with thematic elements to it as well. Do I think that Jon will wield it? Yes, I do, for the reasons I gave slightly earlier in the live stream. Do I think that he will use it in a battle against the others? Well, quite possibly, but quite possibly also he could use it to fight off the last threat, which is not going to be the others, but it's going to be probably Cersei and Euron, and Euron by that time is not just going to be this like pirate captain. He is going to have huge magical undead horrible things going on all around him, and I think that will be when the sword will be used more than anything else. Yeah, so will it be used? How will they get it? I believe it will be carried across there. I'll get onto this in more detail in a moment. It'll be carried across there by Gerald Dayne, Darkstar, and it will be picked up in King's Landing by Jon ultimately, but perhaps other people before that. Chase over on Patreon. Hi, Chase. Says, hi, Robert. So glad to be catching this one live. Well, fantastic. If you're live, great to see you. As we all know, Ashara is currently hiding with Howland up in the neck. Well, we know this. I don't think everyone's bought into this yet, but they will. Ashara and Howland are together in the neck. But how likely do you think that Arthur Dayne is still alive? Do you think George R. R. Martin would do a surprise? He's alive at this point of the game, or is it more likely the Daynes will see our Edric and Darkstar? You also said, at one point you mentioned the possibility of a meetup perhaps in London. Is it something you're still considering? Yeah, I will. Just been a bit busy, but I will at some point just, it will be something very low key in London. I'll probably just announce it a few days beforehand. Kind of, if you happen to be in town and fancy a drink after work, then let's meet up in this pub kind of thing. But yeah, that's definitely something I'm still thinking about. In terms of Arthur Dayne, so I know that there are theories that perhaps he's Corran Halfhand or something like that. Arthur Dayne, on a very pragmatic level, will have had to disappear, and he will have had to go somewhere out of the way, very out of the way. This is one of the reasons why I'm pretty sure Ashara Dayne is in the neck, is that is as out of the way as you're going to get. Nobody goes into the neck. They might travel through it, but they don't actually go into the neck, and nobody from the neck travels out either. Nobody would ever see that she was there, so her fake suicide could never be disproven. Arthur Dayne was the most famous knight in the land. He took part in tourneys across Westeros. He was known to people all over the place. He was at the tourney at Harrenhal, which was massive. That had people not just from all of the south of Westeros, but people came from the north as well. He was incredibly well known. And I don't personally think that joining the Night's Watch would have been a good enough way of hiding out. You can say, yeah, but the Shadow Tower is right at the far end and all the rest of it, which is true. But in order for him to join the Night's Watch, he would have had to gone up to Castle Black, and the Lord Commander would have had to sort of see him first and all the rest of it. So I can't actually see that happening, and it seems like too much of a risk. Because Ned, as I said, Ned was assiduous in making sure that nobody ever found out about what happened at the Tower of Joy. And that included tearing down the entire tower, a stone tower, in order to make sure that nobody ever visited it again. That meant making sure that a lot of his bannermen hated his guts. Barbary Dustin hated Ned Stark's guts by not bringing back their bodies, and which is perhaps forgivable because, you know, it was just him and Howland and a lot of dead bodies, but he didn't even tell her where to go to find the dead body. He refused to say where the Tower of Joy was. And that was massive. That was huge. He was absolutely committed to making sure that there was no loose ends here at all, because he is committed to protecting Jon and Jon's identity. I don't think he would have allowed Arthur Dayne to say, oh yeah, I'm just going to nip up to the wall, because the chances that somebody would recognize him were actually quite high. So I think that is one of the reasons. The other reason, which I covered in my video about why did they fight, is I think that Arthur Dayne took his vow seriously. All of the Kingsguard took their vow seriously to follow the letter of what they've been told to do. This is why they fought, because as everyone's just pointed out, it seemed not Ned wasn't going to kill Lyanna, but the last order would have been, don't let anyone from Robert Baratheon's side get in at all, stop them. So he would have followed orders to the letter. The Kingsguard all did that. They stood by and watched horrific, brutal things happen and justified it on the grounds that we're obeying orders. That's what they were about. They were we're just obeying orders guys. They're described as being this wonderful group of soldiers, but in reality, shining knights, in reality, they're not. They were the people who looked aside while someone was burnt alive or someone else was raped. They just looked aside, and when somebody queried it, they said, this is just what we do. We just let this happen. So that's why he was there. He was a job's worth. He did to the letter what he was supposed to do. I do not think that he will have gone, nah, all right, fair enough. I'll head up to the wall after this. I'll let you just go off and do your thing. That wasn't him. I think he had to die there. The language was also very clear. George R. R. Martin, when he talked about who rode away, we had Ned 7 plus the 3 Kingsguard, only 2 lived to ride away. That seems very clear language to me. It wasn't. We often overstate, I think, this it's all in a fever dream thing when Ned's remembering the Tower of Joy. If you read that passage carefully, not all of it is in a fever dream. Some of it is him reflecting on what happened in his fever dream and remembering whether that was real or not. And that is the bit that we can trust. The fever dream itself, yeah. So, you know, Ned walking around with like flower petals all over, that didn't exactly happen. People looking like shades, that didn't exactly happen. But there are some things like who was involved and stuff like that, and Ned thinks specifically about whether or not they were there and who rode away afterwards, not his fever dream. Okay, let's have a quick chat. Look at the chat. Mod Mary 1. What do you think about Ashara and Howland equals Mira Reed? And Quaithe is Alyssa Farman. Okay, so the first bit about Ashara and Howland equals Mira Reed. I am absolutely on board with this. This is, as far as I'm concerned, this is headcanon. This is true. I did a video on it, doing all of the evidence there, but for me, I can't see a way around the evidence that we have that Howland Reed and Ashara Dayne did get together. Their child is Mira. They moved together up to the neck. That seems absolutely to fit with all the facts that we have. As for Quaithe is Alyssa Farman. So Alyssa Farman, for those who don't know, Alyssa Farman is a fantastic character that really rounded out in Fire and Blood Part 1, which we had was it last year or the year before? Whenever it was. And that she basically, there's a long story leading up to it, but she heads off west in a massive, wonderful boat. She heads off west, and then we sort of get this hint that she manages to get all the way around the world and reappears in Ashai. Now, Quaithe wears a mask like they have in Ashai, so perhaps she could be Alyssa Farman. It's possible, I guess. My personal guess is that this is Shira Seastar, simply for who is she's a Targaryen bastard, and she was the sort of lover half sister of Bloodraven. And I like the idea that she is Quaithe character is trying to guide Dany to do the things that she thinks that she ought to do, which is basically embrace her inner Targaryenness and head back over to Westeros. And that seems to be based on this idea that Dany has got stuff she needs to be doing over in Westeros. So my guess is that Quaithe thinks that Dany is Azor Ahai Reborn, the Princeman's Promised. Bloodraven seems to think that Jon is, and I think that this would be a wonderful piece of sort of symmetry of the story, the kind of thing George R. R. Martin loves doing. If these two lovers who probably no longer in contact, haven't seen each other for ages, we get told that Bloodraven tried to contact people but couldn't, that they are actually now working sort of together, but also slightly at odds to one another, and that kind of seemed to be how their relationship was. So that's where I'm at. Alyssa Farman, I like the idea, love the character, but I think there's a better thought. Let's have a quick flick through. Voice of Reason, thank you for the super chat, saying question below, I'm too broke to buy more characters. Okay, have you ever played the Song of Ice and Fire pen and paper role-playing game before? I've been wondering if it's any good. No, I haven't. I do, I mean, I've not done it for a long time, but I do love a little bit of tabletop role-play. If anyone has played it in the chat, do leave a comment in there. I would be interested to know whether it's any good. Okay, let's go to question from No Scar over on Patreon, saying, hi Robert, I'm just wondering if Howland fought alongside Ned through Robert's rebellion, or if he went to the neck after the turning at Harrenhal. Is Bloodraven communicating with Howland during this turbulent event? So yeah, I'm going to do my video on this, so I'll talk about this a whole lot more there. But in terms of whether Howland fought alongside Ned, we're told yes. Yes, he did. The bit that we perhaps don't know about is the bit, as you say, after the turning at Harrenhal. After the turning at Harrenhal, Ned headed east to the Eyrie, and then from the Eyrie he sort of went up to Winterfell and then back down again. There's no indication that Howland went with Ned on that journey there, so the implication is that maybe he went back up north and rejoined the army there and then came down, or maybe he stayed in the Riverlands and waited until Ned emerged with the army. We don't know. What we do know is that, yes, he fought alongside him during the war, which is, by implication, the 3 battles, if you call them that, the Battle of the Bells, the Battle of the Trident, and then the sack of King's Landing, and also the lifting of the siege of Storm's End. Those things, and leading up to the Tower of Joy, those things Howland Reed was alongside Ned for. The bit beforehand, we don't know. My headcanon is that is when he and Ashara Dayne were falling in love and spending time with each other. But we literally have no knowledge or information about what he was doing there. Was Bloodraven communicating with Howland during this time? He definitely did, in my view. On the Isle of Faces, Howland Reed went to the Isle of Faces just before the turning at Harrenhal, and he spent some time there. That, I think, was when the Isle of Faces are effectively the heart of the Weirwood network. And as far as we can tell, that was when he and Bloodraven sort of set up contact, and after that, Howland seems to have gone off. Here we go. This is me spoiling my future videos. After that, Howland seems to be Bloodraven's man on the ground, doing stuff for him, heading into Harrenhal. He was there, manipulating events, getting Lyanna and Rhaegar together, and all the rest of it. So that he definitely got commissioned by Bloodraven to be doing stuff, in my view. Whether there was contact later on, well, there aren't as many weirwood trees in the south, but it's entirely possible that Bloodraven may have found other ways to talk to him. Bloodraven can use animals, birds, and all the rest of it. So I think it's entirely possible that, yes, Bloodraven will have been in contact, not sort of on a chatting basis, but, you know, keeping tabs on what's going on. Maura Lee says, you mentioned in previous streams that Ashara Dayne is with Howland Reed and is the mother of both Jojen and Mira. I did. Do you think she will make an appearance in the last 2 books? And if so, what will be her role or roles? I think that, sorry, I got slightly distracted by somebody in the chat saying only 2 rode away, but did anyone walk away? Good question. The language usage, this is talking about the Tower of Joy. The language usage there is very precise. George R. R. Martin does use very precise language about the Tower of Joy. There are a number of different ways out there, but I think the implication is that the rest of them died in that battle, and I think that the fact that Arthur's last commission from Rhaegar will have been not to let anyone in, will have been the thing which stopped him from just giving up. But coming back to the question about Ashara Dayne, will she make a reappearance? Possibly. I think her main role has been done, is the main answer to this. I think her main role was back in Robert's Rebellion. Maybe she will reappear. I don't know. I think we're told Howland Reed will. George R. R. Martin has said Howland Reed will make an appearance, but he can't yet because he's got all the answers. So he has to wait until near the end of the story. My feel is that if he leaves the Neck, he would probably leave Ashara there. But I don't know. I think the short answer is I don't think she's got a specific role left in the story, or not a specific large role left in the story. But the fact that she is there is in and of itself going to be important. Jeff Burst, hi, great to see you, Jeff, saying keep it up, super sticker, yeah. Flagging, having to keep on drinking. So one more question about this is about Robert's Rebellion slightly more broadly, not so much about and thank you, Jeff. I should have said that's I really do appreciate that, about Robert's Rebellion, not specifically about House Dayne, I'm very happy to answer. This is from one of my patrons saying, I'm re-listening to your summary of Robert's Rebellion and I have a few questions I'm a little confused about. So Tywin sacks King's Landing, killing Elia and her children. He offers Cersei to Robert to be his new queen, but as of this point, isn't Lyanna still alive as far as Robert knows? Aren't they still engaged? Or is Tywin offering Cersei as a backup bride? Wouldn't Robert immediately refuse because of his burning love for Lyanna? Yeah, so the iteration here, we don't know the exact timings. The headline is that Robert and Cersei married in 184 AC, I think it is, and Robert's rebellion ended in 183 AC, so there is a gap. But the iteration of events appears to be Robert becomes king, then Ned comes back and tells him that Lyanna's dead. He mourns for her, says, oh, I'm not going to marry anyone now. Then Jon Arryn, who was Robert and Ned's foster dad, but also the new Hand of the King, he basically said, okay, well, hang on a moment. You're the king now. You do need to have an heir. You do need to establish your kingdom and sort of tie in the powerful players here. So you probably should marry. Looking around, there actually weren't that many options at the time, to be honest, in the great houses in terms of sort of eligible daughters. And the richest and most powerful house were House Lannister. So Cersei was the obvious choice. It was more, yes, I'm sure that Tywin was sort of manipulating events behind the scenes, but this was more Jon Arryn saying you really should marry. So that was the iteration of events. Robert learned about Lyanna's death, decided not to remarry, then got persuaded that he probably should for political reasons. He never got over Lyanna, and this was the root of the problems with him and Cersei. Okay, we've got a few more questions from my patrons about the future of House Dayne. So I'll work my way through these ones. Good time to drop some other questions into the chat. I will try and get to as many questions in the chat as I possibly can. Liam Mullen says, do you think we will see Dawn being used in the Winds of Winter? Yes, I've already touched on this a few times, so Dawn being the House Sword of House Dayne. I think that this will come into play when we get Darkstar, who's this character that I was talking about. He is a Dayne, but a member of a cadet branch of House Dayne. He seems very jealous of his Arthur Dayne's achievements, and has quite a lot of pride. And I suspect, given the fact that House Dayne itself seems to be quite decimated, Ashara and Arthur are gone. As far as we know, the ruling lord has gone, had only one child, Edric, who has disappeared. And then somewhere we've got Valyria, the youngest daughter. So he will probably, I think, claim Dawn for himself. I think that he will proclaim himself the Sword of the Morning, or possibly the Sword of the Evening. There is a precedent back in the history of House Dayne. Somebody was called the Sword of the Evening. But he will then, I think, we tie this across to the bigger picture of what's happening with House Martell. House Martell are going to, I'm pretty sure, align themselves with this invasion from Aegon the Sixth, this Fagon character, the person who was young Griff. I think that they will align themselves very strongly with that. The reason being that the sort of the plot that's been going on with the Martells has been for a long time to try and get the Targaryens back onto the throne. We get Doran, who sent out his children to these two people who claim to be Targaryens. He sent one, Quentyn, his son, off to Daenerys, basically saying, you should marry me and we should rule. But he overplayed his hand, shall we say, and died at Dragonfire. Nasty way to go. And his daughter, Arianne, is currently, as we see in the pre-release chapters from the Winds of Winter that we've had, she is on her way to try and find Aegon. And I suspect that they will, particularly if news comes back about what happened with Quentyn, I think that the Martells will throw their weight behind this invasion by Fagon, because they've already taken. So it's an ongoing invasion, and they've got the Golden Company, yes, with elephants. They've got the Golden Company. The rumours that they're about to take Storm's End. If they do, that's going to be a massive sort of coup for them. And then I think that they're going to go to King's Landing. Varys is working behind the scenes to disrupt the defences there. So I think that they will successfully take King's Landing. What does this new king, who claims to be a Targaryen, the heir to the Targaryen throne, what does he need symbolically? What should he have in order to show and prove his right to rule? Because people will be suspicious. Well, sitting on the Iron Throne probably helps. I suspect he will get the sword Blackfire, which went missing, which was the ancestral sword of the Targaryen kings. And I suspect he is now starting to create his Kingsguard. I suspect that he will look to Gerald Dayne, the Sword of the Morning, and go, aha, this will make people think about Arthur Dayne, who was, of course, the last Targaryen kings, the shining star in the Kingsguard of the last Targaryen king. So I think that there will be this kind of echo going on there. That's how I think that Dawn will make its way to King's Landing. I think that King's Landing, however, is going to be in for a terrible time over the next couple of books. I think that there will be a grayscale outbreak. I think that then, having already had the one invasion, I think that Daenerys will then come and arrive and find that it is being held by Fagon, and I think that she will not react well to that. I think that the sword will then be left in and around King's Landing, and then, as I said earlier in the live stream, pardon me, I think that that's when Jon will eventually end up picking it up and using it. Okay, so that's what I think is going on with there. Fedra the Beloved is saying, hey Robert, hope you're doing well. I was wondering if we would ever see Edric Dayne again. So Edric is he is the new Lord of Starfall, so he's the new head of House Dayne. He was when Illyria, the youngest of these Dayne siblings, became engaged to Beric Dondarrion, he sort of went along to be to learn the trade, to be a squire for a while and all the rest of it. But he got caught up with Beric in the Brotherhood Without Banners, and the war happened and all the rest of it. So he was last seen effectively trying to escape from Lady Stoneheart and what she'd turned the Brotherhood Without Banners into. The question is interesting because of the age issue here. Now, for those don't, this is sort of like a mechanics of George R. R. Martin writing point, but it does tell us a few things about some of the characters. That he thinks of himself as being a gardener writer, which is sort of his way of talking about. He plants the story and just sees how it grows and sort of goes along with the story. The characters evolve and all the rest of it. I think that's a slightly self-romanticizing way of him talking about his own writing style, because he clearly does plan ahead a bit. He clearly writes in foreshadowing and imagery, which will sort of like echo through the book and creates legends that we can start to learn about things that might happen. So he does do a lot of that kind of stuff, but he is a sort of a writer who figures stuff out as he goes along. He doesn't plan everything out in intricate detail. And this means that sometimes he figures stuff out partway through that don't quite work anymore. And one of the things that didn't quite work was he realized that actually the children's ages started too young. So on the show, we know what ages they all looked. In the books, they very clearly were children. So Sansa, I think, was 11. Bran, I think, was 6. And yet he had these huge storylines set up for all of these characters. And perhaps just as crucially, the dragons were born at the end of book 1, but by book 6 or 7, they need to be these huge aircraft carriers with wings, effectively breathing fire down on cities and all the rest of it. The dragons needed to grow. And so his initial thought was that he was going to have this 5-year break. He was like between books or something where the dragons can grow and the children can grow up and all the rest of it. And then as he went along, he realized actually he didn't want to do that. That wasn't quite working. So he shuffled things around a bit. He added in a whole load of extra stuff. Daenerys' story, that a lot of the things happening in Marine and Slavers Bay, this is stuff that he wasn't originally anticipating. But he's kind of like beefed them up to add in this extra bit of time, which is all a little bit of background information to the fact that although he made sure that we couldn't see the joins almost across the piece, there are some characters, not major characters, some characters who he's had to change their plot lines simply because where he'd originally thought that they were going to be, it's not going to happen after all. And one of these is Edric Dayne. Now, Edric Dayne obviously starts off very young. If there had been this extra time jump, then he would have turned into sort of like someone who was old enough to be doing lots of fighting and all the rest of it. And George R. R. Martin has basically said the character of Darkstar was created to do the things that Edric Dayne couldn't do because he didn't have this time jump. So what this means is that we have to keep an eye out for Darkstar, because Darkstar clearly is going to do some things that George R. R. Martin had planned in advance, so were reasonably important. But secondly, we've got this character, Edric Dayne, who is now kind of divested of his purpose. So the question is, what's George going to do with him? Now, he's used him a couple of times just to sort of pop up and be people's conscience and to sort of give a little bit of backstory and all the rest of it. And he seems now to be heading back down south, perhaps towards Dawn. Will we see him again? Yes, I'm pretty sure we will. This ties in actually with Maura Lee. This is the final question I've got from my patrons. So as I say, if there are other questions, I'll come to them in the chat in just a moment about what the future of House Dayne is. I do not know, but I hope that Edric, Ned, for that's the nickname they gave him, will survive and will be the future of House Dayne. I don't know this. It's a very George R. R. Martin thing to do, to kill off families, and it'd be very easy to kill off House Dayne because there don't seem to be that many of them. And thematically, House Dayne, like the Starks, their role in the grand scheme of things will seemingly end with the end of the Long Night Part 2. When that has ended, that seems to be that their watch is over. Perhaps thematically we could see Edric Dayne dying and House Dayne dying. I hope not, simply because he seems to offer a little bit of hope. His character is one of the people who just wants he sees goodness, and that is quite rare in this world of George R. R. Martin. So I hope he survives. I don't think he's going to have a huge role in the plot going forward. I think we will see him again, but I hope he survives. Okay, let's quickly have a quick flick through the chat. Had lots of fantastic questions coming in earlier. Scott McCloy saying, how strong went extinct, their descendants but are still relevant. Yeah, they are. How strong are, but I think that House Stark and House Dayne have specific roles that they were given back in sort of the early days after the first Long Night. So I think that, yes, there are some ancient houses which have been around and have had impacts later on, but in terms of actually having their specific role set out for them, the Starks must always be in Winterfell because they have to be building up. This is another video I've got coming up, but they have to keep on building up the stock of Starks in the Winterfell crypts. Quick flick through. I think Will Moss saying, did George R. R. Martin actually say himself that Darkstar was in to fill in Edric's old position, or is that just theorizing? Yeah, he has. I mean, by all means, correct me, people, but that's my understanding is that George R. R. Martin has said that that is why he created this character. So Buckley saying, I'd love the massive middle finger George could give us by just shifting the 5-year gap to between Winds and Dream. I never see that discussed, but that would be amazing. Yeah, that would be quite interesting. I think the 5-year gap, though, between Winds and Dream, I think the dragons are going to be big enough already. And this, the age of the characters, I think, is almost less of an issue. The question is, yes, they're magical beasts, but how quickly, realistically, can a dragon go from being a hatchling to being this massive thing that everybody fears? 5, 6, 7 years seems about as quick as you possibly can do it. Andrew Kay pointing out Robb Stark was a battle commander at about 15. A lot of characters could have done with some slight aging up, but had a lot of experience around him, I suppose. Yeah, so, and at 15, at that time, that was an age when you would start doing stuff. So it's a significant thing. So it's just about okay, which is why I think that he decided that he could extend the story a little bit without having this full extra 5-year gap. Sonata Systems, thank you so much for the super chat. That's very kind. 2 super chats, thank you, saying Vinny Geek. But thank you, I really appreciate that. Let's a couple of other things. Logan Ruby saying, do you think it would have been a good idea if they put Lady Stoneheart in the show? Yes. George R. R. Martin said that this was probably the character he was most disappointed that they didn't have in the show. I understood it, though, because they did have to cut things down for the show from the books. And Lady Stoneheart, although she is important, a lot of her, and I'm considering doing another live stream or a video about Lady Stoneheart. A lot of people are interested in her character arc going forward. But broadly speaking, she is clearly on a vengeance mission and within the Riverlands. And there's another Stark who's also on a vengeance mission within the Riverlands that they could use, which was Arya. So I kind of understood why they took her out, because they could quite easily just cut her out without, pardon me, without having a huge, pardon me, I may have to end in a moment, without having a huge problem with all of the extra bits of plot line that are drifting about all over the place. Oh, yeah. Guys, I think my voice has literally just given up. So I'm going to have to end it there. But thank you so much for the questions, particularly the super chats. I really do appreciate it. Next week, I'm hoping to have, and if it's not next week, then it will be the week after. We're going to have Aziz on from History of Westeros. Haven't decided the topic yet, but he's always excellent. So please do check us out same time next week. If you are, if you're watching this not live but a little bit later, then somewhere up around there will be appearing a link to more of these live streams that I've done. If you're interested in watching some more of them, somewhere around there is going to be a link to my Patreon page, which is where you go if you want to support the channel, or if you want to get access to some of the extra stuff I'm doing. For example, the bonus Traveller's Guides that I will be doing for my patrons only, just as a thank you to them. Okay, guys, thank you so much. I really appreciated the fantastic questions today. I've had a lot of fun. My voice hopefully will survive, and I will see you same time next week. Take care, everyone, and I will see you again.